Imagine being a child. You're 7 years old. Your world should be full of games, stories, and carefree afternoons. But not in medieval Europe. Not if your family has decided you are destined to become a knight. Because from that moment on, your life changes forever. And not for the better. At age 7, you are sent away from your home, not just to a different town, but to live under the roof of another noble family. Your parents might hope this will give you opportunities, status, and honor, but what it really gives you is servitude. You become a page, the lowest rung on the knightly ladder. Your job? Run errands, clean boots, fetch firewood, and assist the lord and lady of the manor in every mundane chore they can think of. You are for all intents and purposes a servant in noble clothing. Your days are long. You rise before dawn, sometimes sleeping on the cold floor, and get to work. You clean the horses, you polish armor, you carry messages, and when you finally get a break, it's not to rest, it's to practice, because even as a page you are being groomed to fight. Swordplay begins with wooden blades. They're heavy, unwieldy, and painful when they strike your body, which they often do. Your instructors are harsh. Mistakes are punished, not corrected. You might be hit for slouching, for dropping a weapon, or for showing fear. Crying is not allowed. Weakness is not allowed. You learn to suppress pain, ignore hunger, and push through exhaustion. By the time you reach 14, you graduate to the next stage, squire. Now you are assigned to a knight, your master. It's your job to carry his weapons, take care of his horse, polish his armor, and be by his side in battle. And make no mistake, he won't treat you kindly. You are expected to know his needs before he voices them. You patch his wounds, you absorb his anger, you endure his tests, and you're still expected to train every day. Training now includes real weapons, swords, spears, and shields, all designed to injure and all hurled in your direction. You spar against other squires, often without proper padding. You are bruised, you bleed, and, if you're lucky, you survive. Horses are another brutal lesson. Knights don't just ride horses, they fight from them. That means you must learn to mount, ride, and control a massive warhorse while wearing heavy armor and wielding a sword. Horses can be unpredictable. You get kicked, thrown, trampled. You're expected to get up every time. Discipline is unrelenting. You are taught to obey without question. You eat only what you're given. You sleep when told. You speak only when permitted. The noble life you imagined? It's nowhere to be found. And yet this grueling life continues for years. 7, sometimes 10, even 12 years. It is a test not just of strength, but of spirit. Many boys don't make it. Some die. Others are dismissed for failing to meet expectations. If you endure all this, you might finally be dubbed a knight in a ceremony that, while grand, does nothing to erase the scars, physical and emotional, that the training has left on you. Because this is what no one tells you in those romantic tales of shining armor. Becoming a knight wasn't about glory, it was about surviving a brutal, unforgiving system that started breaking you when you were still a child. There were no days off, no safe spaces, no mercy. You grew up fast and you grew up hard. You were molded into a weapon, obedient, loyal, and brutal, and once the knighthood was earned, the hardships were only beginning. So next time someone tells you being a knight was a dream come true, think of the page scrubbing floors with frozen fingers, the squire nursing a black eye after training, and the child who traded his childhood for a title that promised honor but demanded everything. Because the road to knighthood? It wasn't paved with glory, it was soaked in sweat, blood, and sacrifice. Picture this, the sun hasn't even crested the horizon, and already your squire is helping you into a suit of armor that feels more like a prison than protection. The plates clank together, each piece strapped in with leather bindings, buckles, and sheer hope. It takes at least 30 minutes to get fully suited, longer if the straps are stiff from yesterday's rain. By the time you stand upright, you're already sweating, your joints feel restricted, and the day hasn't even begun. A full suit of plate armor in the later Middle Ages could weigh anywhere between 45 to 60 pounds. That's the equivalent of hauling a loaded suitcase on your back, except this suitcase is wrapped around every limb of your body, squeezing your ribs, constricting your neck, and enclosing your hands in metal mittens. It wasn't designed for comfort, it was designed to keep you alive, barely. Now, armor wasn't just heavy, it was also incredibly hot. In the heat of summer, knights risked dehydration or even fainting. The ventilation was practically non-existent, and don't even think about taking a bathroom break once suited up. Relieving yourself meant either fully disarming or, more realistically, suffering the indignity of soiling your garments mid-battle. That wasn't a rare occurrence, it was just another accepted misery of the profession. Then there was the mobility issue. While good armor was articulated enough to allow movement, that movement was still slower, more deliberate. Sprinting? Nearly impossible. Climbing a wall? Only if you had no intention of surviving. Even mounting a horse required assistance, and once on the horse, you prayed you wouldn't fall off, because getting back up in that armor? A whole new battle on its own. Now imagine entering actual battle. The dream of galloping across golden fields with a banner fluttering in the wind? Forget it. You're slogging through mud, surrounded by dozens or hundreds of other knights and foot soldiers. The air is thick with the stink of sweat, horses, blood, and fear. You can't hear orders over the chaos. Your visor restricts your vision. You swing your sword at shadows and hope they're the enemy. And that sword? It might glance off your opponent's armor, so you switch tactics. Maybe a mace or a warhammer, weapons designed not to slice, but to crush. Because in real battle, blunt trauma was the killer. Even if armor wasn't pierced, the force behind a blow could shatter bones, rupture organs, or cause concussions. A hit to the helmet might leave your ears ringing or your skull cracked. A strike to the chest might stop your heart hours later, bleeding out inside your own ribcage. The battlefield itself was no romantic setting, it was a hellscape. Men screamed in agony, horses trampled the fallen, blood mixed with mud, limbs were severed, faces disfigured. There was no choreography, no honor code, no cinematic slow motion, just brutal survival. You were one bad swing or miss block away from death, or worse, maiming. And then there was the psychological toll. The constant adrenaline, the heart-pounding fear, the mental calculation of who to help, who to abandon, who to kill. The screams of comrades dying beside you, the smell of burning flesh. You couldn't forget it even if you tried. Some knights drank heavily after battle, others simply shut down, numb to the world. Injuries were not just common, they were expected, and medical care was primitive. A broken limb might be set with wooden splints and hope. A deep wound might be cauterized with a hot poker, with no anesthetic beyond a leather strap to bite. Infection? Almost guaranteed. Antibiotics didn't exist. Survival depended on your luck, your immune system, and maybe divine mercy. Let's not forget exhaustion. Battles could last hours, sometimes days. Fighting in heavy armor while swinging a weapon non-stop? That's a level of physical strain most modern athletes would struggle with. And unlike sports, you couldn't tap out. If you fell, there was a good chance you wouldn't get back up. Horses were another layer of complexity. While they gave you speed and height advantage, they were also massive targets. If your horse was struck or panicked, you could be thrown, crushed, or trampled. And a knight on foot in heavy armor was a slow, vulnerable beast. Even when the fighting ended, the aftermath was its own nightmare. The battlefield littered with corpses, many of them stripped by looters. You might have to step over the bodies of friends, rivals, or even family, and you might be ordered to press forward anyway, to the next siege, the next skirmish, the next hell. Your armor, if damaged, needed repairing, dents hammered out, straps replaced, joints oiled. That was your responsibility. You paid for it, you maintained it, and if you couldn't afford the upkeep, you went into battle less protected. You gambled with your life every time. Even victories were grim. There was rarely celebration, just exhaustion, the tally of dead, and the endless questions. Would your lord reward you? Would you live to see home? What was the point? In short, armor wasn't your shining badge of honor. It was a constant reminder of the burden you carried. And battle wasn't your path to glory. It was a brutal, unforgiving reality that left most knights broken in body, if not in spirit. So the next time you see a knight gleaming in a film or fantasy novel, remember, behind that shine was a man weighed down by more than just steel. He was burdened by fear, fatigue, and the brutality of battle itself. Imagine waking up before dawn, your body already sore from yesterday's drills. Today is battle day. There's no time to stretch or ease into the morning. You're thrust immediately into preparation mentally and physically. First comes the armor. Piece by piece, layer by layer. It takes at least 2 people to help you into it. Chainmail shirt first, then padded garments underneath to prevent the metal from biting into your skin. After that, the breastplate, the greaves, the gauntlets, and the helmet. It's not just protection, it's a prison. By the time it's all on, you're carrying 45 to 60 pounds of metal, and it's not evenly distributed either. The pressure on your shoulders and joints is immense. You haven't even fought yet and your body is already protesting. Moving in armor isn't like the movies. It's clunky, noisy, exhausting. Each step requires effort. Running? Nearly impossible. If you fall, good luck getting back up on your own. The sun is barely cresting the hills when your commander gives the signal. Mounted or on foot, you make your way toward the battlefield, and this is where the fantasy of knightly combat collapses. There are no polished speeches or slow-motion charges, no elegant duels, just chaos, mud sucking at your boots, screams and smoke in every direction, friends dying inches from your face, enemies charging with weapons made to do one thing, break you. Swords slash, but the real damage comes from blunt weapons. Maces and warhammers weren't designed to pierce your armor. They were designed to turn your rib cage into jelly inside it. One good strike could cave in your chest plate. You might not bleed on the outside, but inside, your organs are wrecked, and that's if you're lucky. Unlucky means a shattered arm, a leg twisted the wrong way, or a dented helmet crushing your skull. You can't hear much inside that helmet. The clang of metal on metal rings in your ears. You rely on peripheral vision, but that's limited too. In the heat of battle, you're not thinking about strategy or honor. You're thinking about surviving the next 10 seconds, then the next, and the next. Every swing of your sword drains you. Every block vibrates through your bones. The armor keeps some blows out, sure, but it doesn't make you invincible. It just makes you slower, more tired, and more dependent on sheer luck. If you get knocked down, and many do, you become a target. Getting up in full armor is a struggle even on dry, flat ground. Now imagine trying it in thick mud with bodies piling up around you and arrows whizzing past your head. If you can't rise fast enough, you're either trampled by cavalry or finished off by a foot soldier. And if you're wounded, there's no pause button, no medic running to your side. You crawl to safety if you can, if not, you die where you fall. And that armor everyone idolizes? It traps heat. After minutes of fighting, you're drenched in sweat, your muscles are screaming, your vision is blurred from exhaustion and grime. The stench, blood, sweat, rot, chokes your nostrils. There's no glamour here, only grit. Sometimes your own comrades are the biggest threat. Confusion reigns. People mistake you for the enemy. In the frenzy, discipline breaks down, orders are lost. Your side might even retreat and leave you behind, or worse, trample you as they flee. And if you survive this hellscape of swinging steel and screaming men, your battle isn't over. You're left with injuries that might not kill you immediately but will haunt you for life. Concussions from blunt hits, crushed fingers inside gauntlets, sprained ankles, infected wounds. There's no real treatment, no proper doctors, just herbs, guesswork, and the prayers of a monk. You don't go home a hero, you go home in pain. You wake in the night from phantom blows. You dread the next call to arms. And yet, this is your life. Fighting battles that aren't yours, shedding blood for lords who might not remember your name. But there is no victory in this reality. Even if your side wins, you mourn the dead. You bury friends in shallow graves with their armor stripped by looters. You wash off the blood, yours and others, and wait for the next war. Because there will always be a next war. And maybe the worst part? The silence afterward. When the screaming stops and the battlefield goes quiet, you're left with the echo, the memories. The weight of the armor is gone, but the burden remains. This was the brutality of battle and the true weight of a knight's armor, not just on the body but on the mind, the soul. This wasn't glory, it was survival, and barely that. You've survived the brutal training, you've endured years of discipline, servitude, and physical punishment. Now you've finally earned your title as a knight, but instead of glory and gratitude, you step into a world that's just as unrelenting, only now you carry the burden of metal and the looming specter of battle. First, let's talk armor. You might think of it as a badge of honor, a gleaming suit that turns heads and deflects blades, and sure, it looks impressive, but in reality, it's your prison. A full suit of plate armor in the late Middle Ages could weigh between 45 to 60 pounds, and sometimes more. Try walking in that. Now try running. Now imagine doing both in the heat of summer while someone's trying to stab you. Not so glorious now, is it? The moment you strap that armor on, your life changes. Your movement is restricted, breathing becomes harder, visibility is poor. Most helmets had narrow slits, barely wide enough to see a charging enemy. Your peripheral vision is almost non-existent. You're a walking tank, sure, but you're also a sitting duck if someone sneaks up behind you. And heaven help you if you fall off your horse. Getting up in full armor without help, nearly impossible. But let's say you manage to stay on your feet. Now comes the real nightmare, battle. You might picture knights galloping in formation, banners flying, swords clashing in a symphony of heroism, The reality? It was chaos. There were no choreographed duels or sweeping camera angles. You're thrust into a mud-soaked, blood-spattered melee. Men are screaming, horses are panicking, the air is thick with smoke, sweat, and fear. The weapons weren't elegant either. Yes, swords were used, but not for slicing through armor. Instead, weapons evolved to counter the very protection knights wore. Maces, warhammers, flails. These weren't designed to cut, they were designed to crush. The goal wasn't just to kill you, but to incapacitate you by breaking your bones inside that steel shell. Your armor might not be pierced, but your ribs could be shattered. Your skull could be concussed, you could be alive but in pieces. Even if you walked away from battle, you rarely walked away unscathed. The trauma was real, physically and mentally. Internal injuries, broken limbs, bruises that never healed right. And infection was a constant threat. A splintered bone or open wound could mean a slow death days later, long after the battle had ended. There were no antiseptics, no painkillers, just herbal poultices and whispered prayers. You might think armor at least made you invincible. Wrong again. Blunt force wasn't the only danger. Armor had gaps. Under the arms, at the neck, behind the knees, a well-placed dagger could find its way in. And don't forget archers. A volley of arrows could turn a battlefield into a slaughterhouse in seconds. Even if one didn't pierce your armor, the force could knock you down, making you an easy target for finishing blows. Then there's the psychological burden. You know the battle is coming. You spend hours, sometimes days, waiting, dreading, feeling the weight of that armor before a single enemy appears. You hear stories of comrades trampled by their own horses or suffocating inside their helmets. Some knights reportedly died of heat stroke before ever facing a blade. The anticipation alone was enough to make men sick. And once the battle began, there was no turning back. You fought for hours. Your arms ached from the weight of your sword and shield. Your legs burned with every step. And if you were lucky, you made it out alive. If you were truly lucky, you weren't permanently maimed. Victory didn't always feel like victory. It felt like survival. After the fighting stopped, the horrors didn't. The stench of death lingered for days. Flies swarmed the bodies. Wounded men screamed in agony, their injuries left untreated. The cleanup fell to peasants and lower-ranked soldiers. But for a knight, the psychological scars were permanent. Every battle left a mark on your body, on your mind, and on your soul. And the next time? It didn't get easier. You remembered the friends who died. You remembered the pain. And still, you suited up again, because that's what was expected. That was your duty. No matter how many battles you fought, the fear never truly left. And deep down, you knew. One day, your luck would run out. So much for glory. And here's the kicker. Even outside of war, you couldn't escape the armor. Tournaments, training exercises, ceremonial duties. You wore it all the time. Your body became deformed. Permanent grooves in your shoulders, joint pain, muscle fatigue. The armor protected you, sure, but it also punished you. Still think it looked cool? Ask any knight who wore it for more than an hour. The chafing alone could bring a grown man to tears. Sweat pooled in your boots. Your underclothes became soaked and sour, and let's not even talk about what happened when nature called. There were no zippers, no modern conveniences. You held it or prayed you could. And when it finally came off, you didn't feel relief. You felt exposed, vulnerable, like taking off your skin. That armor was your identity, your shield, your burden, and it never truly left you. So next time you see a knight gleaming in a movie or on a poster, remember this. Behind that shine was a man suffocating under the weight of his own legend, a man who walked into battle knowing he might never walk out, not because he wasn't brave, but because bravery had nothing to do with survival. It was steel, sweat, and scars. If that shattered the fantasy for you, hit that like button and subscribe for more unfiltered history and drop a comment. Do you think you could have handled even 1 hour in full armor, let alone a full day in battle? Let us know, because behind every heroic pose is a story soaked in blood, bruises, and the brutal truth. You think being a medieval knight was all about honor, glory, and riding into battle with shining armor and a noble purpose, right? Think again, because the truth? It sucked. Big time. Stick around, because by the end of this story, you won't be dreaming of castles and chivalry. You'll be thanking your lucky stars you live in the 21st century. Let's drop you right into the thick of it. You're a newly minted knight. Congratulations, right? Wrong. Before you even get to swing a sword, you've already endured years of brutal training, starting when you were just 7 years old. That's right, 7. While modern kids are learning multiplication tables or building Minecraft empires, you're learning how to wrestle, take hits, clean armor, and serve noble lords like a glorified butler. You were a page first, running errands, polishing boots, serving meals. Then a squire, fetching weapons, tending to horses, patching wounds, all while getting yelled at, hit with sticks, and pushed to your breaking point, all in the name of honor. By the time you become a knight, you're battered, exhausted, and so far removed from your childhood dreams that the reality is barely recognizable. But hey, at least you get armor, right? Sure, if you can afford it. A full suit of plate armor in the later Middle Ages could cost the equivalent of a small house. And here's the kicker. It was heavy, like 45, 60 pounds heavy. Ever tried sprinting in 60 pounds of steel? Didn't think so. Forget grace and agility. Every step is a workout. You sweat buckets just putting it on, and once it's on, you better hope you don't have to pee, because taking it off takes half an hour and probably an assistant. And don't get too attached to the image of knights galloping across flowery fields in glorious battles. Real combat was chaos. Mud, blood, screaming men, broken limbs, and the kind of close-quarters violence that scars your soul forever. There's no cinematic music, no slow motion, just the sound of metal slamming into bone and the raw panic of survival. You weren't just fighting strangers, you were fighting disease, fatigue, and often your own side's incompetence. Let's talk about wounds. Armor might protect you from a clean sword swipe, but it won't save you from blunt trauma. Maces, warhammers, flails, they were designed to crush through armor. You could take a blow to the chest and survive the hit, but still die later from internal bleeding. Or worse, live, but with broken ribs piercing your lungs. That kind of injury meant a slow, agonizing death in a dark, dirty tent with no anesthesia and a monk chanting over your body. And when you weren't at war, life didn't get much better. Sure, you had a title, but you also had responsibilities. Lords demanded your presence. You were expected to train constantly, maintain your equipment, supervise serfs, guard your liege's lands, and participate in political games that could turn deadly in an instant. Court politics were a nest of vipers. One wrong word, one misplaced loyalty, and you could find yourself stripped of your lands, your titles, or your head. And speaking of titles and lands, do you really think most knights lived in castles? Think again. Castles were for kings, high lords, and the elite few. Most knights had modest estates, more like fortified farmhouses than palatial fortresses. Cold, damp, drafty, and perpetually infested with fleas. You'd be lucky to sleep in a room without rodents. And the food? Bland, repetitive, and often contaminated. Forget steak dinners and wine feasts, more like salted meat, hard bread, and watered-down ale. Married life wasn't exactly a fairy tale either. Most marriages were arranged for political or financial gain. Love was optional. Your wife was often a stranger, chosen to unite estates or secure a treaty. If she died in childbirth, which happened often, you remarried out of obligation, not grief. And your role as protector of the realm didn't stop at your front door. You were expected to produce heirs, keep the local peasants in line, and maintain law and order, all while pretending you weren't slowly losing your mind from isolation and stress. Let's circle back to hygiene. Imagine spending weeks in armor without a proper bath. Medieval knights weren't exactly fresh-smelling paragons of cleanliness. You might bathe once a month, if that. Your wounds, if untreated, festered. Your teeth rotted. You sweated constantly, and every battle, every hunt, every patrol risked infection. There were no antibiotics, no sterile bandages, just herbs, hope, and the hands of someone who may or may not actually know what they're doing. And the tournaments? Don't romanticize those either. Jousting wasn't sport, it was controlled carnage. Yes, there was honor to be won, but also bones to be broken and lives to be lost. Helmets could trap your head like a vice. A lance to the chest could cave in your ribcage. And if you were unhorsed, you might be dragged, trampled, or finished off before anyone realized the match was supposed to be friendly. And yet, if you refused to participate, you'd be mocked. Your reputation, your livelihood, depended on your willingness to bleed for entertainment. Ever wonder what happened to a knight who lost his lord's favor? He was nothing. Worse than nothing. Stripped of land, armor, and income, he became a vagabond, or worse, a mercenary, hired to fight wars that weren't his, for men who didn't care if he lived or died. Some turned to banditry. Others died nameless, their bones buried in foreign soil. There were no pensions, no veterans' benefits, no therapy for the trauma, just silence. And let's talk about those noble crusades. You think you're going to save the Holy Land? Think again. You're walking for months, sometimes years, across scorching deserts and plague-infested villages. You fight not for glory, but for survival. Crusaders died by the thousands of starvation, dysentery, snake bites, heat stroke, or at the hands of enemies better prepared and far more familiar with the terrain. And if you survived, you returned home to find your land seized, your wife remarried, and your name forgotten. Religion dominated your life. Every action, every thought, every failure was watched by God, or so you were told. You tithed to the church, confessed your sins, and lived in constant fear of eternal damnation. But the church was often just as corrupt as the lords. Bishops wielded swords as often as crosses. Indulgences were bought and sold, and knights were often pawns in holy wars, driven more by politics than faith. Still sound like a life of glory? Let's not forget the mental toll. PTSD didn't have a name, but it had victims. You had nightmares, flashbacks, guilt. You buried friends and killed strangers. You lived with the sound of screams in your ears and the weight of blood on your hands. And you were expected to just carry on. There was no help, no understanding, just drink, violence, and silence. The truth is, being a knight was less about honor and more about survival. Every day was a battle against enemies, illness, the elements, and even your own allies. You lived in constant discomfort. Your body ached, your soul cracked, and all for a cause that was often murky, political, or forgotten. You weren't some mythic hero. You were a man trapped in a brutal system, a system that used you, broke you, and discarded you when you were no longer useful. And if you died in battle, you might be remembered in song, if you were lucky, but more likely, you'd be looted, stripped of your armor, and dumped in a mass grave. Your legacy reduced to a name on a faded parchment or a story told over ale. And if you lived, you got to do it all again tomorrow. The cold, the danger, the pain. So the next time you imagine life as a knight riding into the sunset in shining armor, pause. Think of the mud in your boots, the stink under your breastplate, the fear in your chest, and the ache in your bones. Think of the silence after a friend dies beside you. Think of the scream no one hears when your armor doesn't hold. Think of the weight of a sword you no longer have the strength to lift. That was the truth behind the legend. But you made it to the end of this journey, alive, and hopefully with a new perspective. If this shattered your illusions about the medieval dream, hit that like button and subscribe for more raw, myth-busting history. Drop a comment. Would you have survived a week as a knight? Or tapped out after the first battle? Let us know, because when it comes to the past, the truth is often stranger and a lot darker than the legend. Marriage, hygiene, and daily discomfort. Forget chivalry and courtly love. The life of a knight behind closed doors was far from glamorous. A knight's marriage wasn't usually about passion or choice, it was about strategy, politics, and survival. Most knights were married off as part of alliances, not romances. You didn't pick your bride based on affection, you were assigned one, usually to unite land or strengthen a noble bond. She might be a total stranger, and love was optional. Producing heirs was the main goal. If your wife died, likely during childbirth, which was tragically common, you'd marry again swiftly, out of duty rather than mourning. This cycle was repeated through generations with little thought for emotional connection. When it came to hygiene, forget everything you know about daily routines. Bathing wasn't common, it was considered risky. Medieval belief suggested warm water opened the pores to disease, so many knights avoided it unless absolutely necessary. Imagine wearing armor all day, sweating in it, then collapsing into bed without washing for days or even weeks. The stench, unbearable. Their hair was thick with grease, their nails blackened by dirt and gore. Toothbrushes didn't exist. Dental hygiene meant picking your teeth with twigs, if you did anything at all. Teeth decayed, breath stank, and mouths were often full of rot by middle age. Now picture wounds from battle or training. With no antiseptics, minor cuts could become deadly infections. A broken bone could fester and kill. Bandages were reused cloths. Surgeons, if you were lucky enough to find one, were often barbers or monks with no formal medical education. Bloodletting, herbal poultices, and cauterization with red-hot irons were standard treatments. You didn't get anesthesia, just a piece of leather to bite down on. Surviving wasn't guaranteed. Living meant scarring, physically and mentally. Daily life brought its own tortures. Meals were repetitive and low in nutrition. You ate what you had: salted meat, hard bread, weak ale. Vegetables were rare and considered peasant food. The diet led to constipation, scurvy, and malnutrition. Drinking water was risky, often contaminated, so most people drank diluted ale all day, including children. Sickness was everywhere, and with poor hygiene it spread like wildfire. Fleas, lice, rats, and bedbugs were constant companions. Even nobility couldn't escape infestations. Your bedding was full of vermin. You scratched through your sleep. In winter, homes were freezing. Most knights lived in stone keeps or manor houses that were drafty, dark, and damp. Fireplaces helped, but didn't heat entire rooms. Clothing was layered wool, warm but itchy and heavy. There was no insulation, no central heat. In summer, the same clothes suffocated you. You sweated, stank, and itched constantly. Beyond physical discomfort was mental strain. You were expected to be tough, stoic, and obedient. There was no room for doubt, softness, or sadness. You couldn't cry, couldn't complain. You lived to serve. Honor and strength were everything. Vulnerability was weakness. And don't expect affection or relaxation in your marriage. Women were expected to be obedient, quiet, and fertile. You were rarely partners in any emotional sense. Women died in childbirth frequently, and their suffering was considered just another part of life. Knights were often absent, fighting wars or attending court. Their wives were left to manage households alone. Any emotional connection had to compete with distance, duty, and detachment. So the next time someone says medieval life was noble and elegant, think about rotting teeth, festering wounds, cold nights, joyless marriages, and a diet of salted meat and bad beer. Think about never truly being clean, never being at peace, never being comfortable. Life wasn't a fairy tale. It was a long, gritty fight to stay alive, to stay in favor, to stay sane. And yet, despite the discomfort, despite the disease, knights were expected to show up to war, show up to court, and show up to tournaments like they were living the dream. The truth? It was a nightmare draped in steel and soaked in sweat. If this shattered your medieval daydreams, hit that like button and subscribe for more brutally honest history. Drop a comment. Would you survive a week as a knight? Let's see who's really built for the armor.